Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're looking at a period in history that honestly, it often gets glossed over, but it is absolutely vital for understanding the ancient world. We're talking about the crucible of reinvention. Now, the destruction of Jerusalem and the Babylonian exile, that felt like the absolute end of the world for the Jewish people. But as we're going to see from Dr. Jeffrey Hudon's really fascinating archaeological analysis, it wasn't an end at all. Actually, it was a powerful catalyst for just incredible reinvention. This is the story of how the Persian period practically saved Jewish identity. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is our historical roadmap. First, the Babylonian exile. Second, the birth of the synagogue. Third, Cyrus and the return. Fourth, rebuilding Jerusalem's walls. And finally, life in Persian capitals. Section 1, the Babylonian exile. To really grasp the sheer magnitude of this reinvention, we first have to understand the trauma. And the exile wasn't just, a single bad weekend. It happened in rolling waves. You've got the initial deportation in 597 BC, then the absolute destruction of Jerusalem and the major exile in 586 BC, and that lasted all the way until the fall of Babylon in 539 BC. For a lot of the young exiles taken in 586, this trauma of losing their temple and their homeland, that spanned their entire childhood. By the time they could ever even dream of returning, they were mature adults. I mean, we are talking about a lifetime of total displacement. And let's anchor ourselves in the sheer physical reality of this tragedy. 900. That is the number of miles these displaced people had to walk. An arduous, grueling 900-mile trek across harsh terrain from Jerusalem all the way to Babylon. It wasn't some casual journey. It was a forced march that literally stripped away everything they knew. Dr. Hudon's archaeological records highlight that this journey was so brutal and the subsequent time in exile so incredibly long that most of the older generation, they simply died in Babylon. The people who eventually walked back along that exact same 900-mile route decades later, those were the young ones who managed to survive and grow up in a completely foreign land. Section 2, Birth of the Synagogue. So the physical problem of the exile was immense, for sure. But the spiritual problem, that was even bigger. Think about this for a second. Without a temple, how does a faith survive? For the Jewish people, the Solomonic Temple wasn't just some nice building to visit on the weekends. It was the literal center of their universe. It was the only designated place to sacrifice. So its destruction by the Babylonians was the ultimate existential crisis. If your religion completely requires a temple, and that temple is reduced to ash, what do? Well, you have to adapt. And that desperate, absolute need for adaptation gave us the Beit HaKnesset. Literally translated, it means a house of assembly. These were basically exiled community centers. Now, while there are some historical hints that similar gathering places might have existed before the exile, they absolutely exploded in Babylon out of pure, unadulterated necessity. The Jewish people needed a way to identify with one another, right? They needed to study and to stay united in a pagan land. The source material actually notes it is no overstatement, none at all, to say these assemblies literally saved their identity. Now, here is the really crucial point about why this ancient reinvention echoes so loudly today. The synagogue became the exact prototype for the modern Christian church. Centuries later, when early apostles like Paul were traveling around the Mediterranean to spread the gospel in the first century, they didn't have to start from scratch. This exile-driven innovation provided a pre-existing public platform in almost every major city. The tragedy of Babylon laid the structural groundwork for a global movement centuries later. It's a real game changer. Section 3, Cyrus and the Return. Okay, everything completely flips when the Persians conquer the Babylonians. It fundamentally reshapes the ancient world order. Issued in 538 BC, the Edict of Cyrus was an entirely unprecedented policy shift. Instead of violently crushing conquered peoples like the Babylonians loved to do, Cyrus the Great implements his policy allowing deported peoples to finally just go home if they wanted to. And this wasn't just a special favor for the Jews, by the way. It was an empire-wide strategy. After decades of longing, the door was finally kicked wide open. But of course, as we all know, reality rarely matches our idealized memories. The first group of exiles returns under a Davidic leader named Zerubbabel, and they set out to rebuild their sacred space. But if we contrast the two buildings, wow, it is night and day. You have the legendary, breathtaking grandeur of Solomon's original first temple on one hand, and then the much more modest, scaled-down structure built by Zerubbabel on the other. A lot of the older attorneys who actually remembered the original
They wept in deep disappointment when they saw it. But hey, at the very least, they finally had a temple again.
Section 4. Rebuilding Jerusalem's walls.
Having a spiritual center was one thing, but surviving in this new province, which was now called Yehud, that required dealing with some really gritty, dangerous reality. The foremost archaeological expert on the Persian period, Ephraim Stern, highlights a fascinating point here. While building the temple and reading the law were these monumental spiritual events, archaeologically speaking, the most critical event was rebuilding the actual city walls. Because Jerusalem was constantly under threat from angry regional neighbors who absolutely, under no circumstances, wanted to see the Jewish people reestablish their fortified capital.
The historical texts vividly describe this incredibly dramatic scene. The builders are literally working with a trowel in one hand and a spear in the other. I mean, put yourself in their shoes for a second. You're physically hauling and laying these massive stones, desperately trying to rebuild a ruined city, while constantly looking over your shoulder, weapon drawn, expecting a lethal attack at any given moment. The level of stress and danger was just completely off the charts.
And this tension builds into what feels like a cinematic mini-story. Nehemiah, who is serving as a cupbearer to the Persian king, requests leave to go fix this whole crisis. When he arrives in Jerusalem, he doesn't, throw a parade. Instead, he takes a secret midnight donkey circuit around the city just to survey the destruction left decades ago by Nebuchadnezzar. And it's so devastating, especially on the eastern slope, that he actually has to dismount his donkey because the massive rubble is completely impassable. He then strategically enlists these returnee families to rebuild very specific sections of the wall. This exact account in Nehemiah chapter 3 is so detailed that it remains the absolute best description we have of the pre-exilic city.
Now, this very account actually sparked a massive archaeological debate back in the 1950s. You had Michael Aviona arguing what was called the minimalist view. He believed that pre-exilic Jerusalem was strictly confined to the really small City of David area. He thought mentions of a broad wall just meant a slightly thicker section of that tiny perimeter. But later scholars pushed the expansive view, showing that the broad wall actually enclosed the entire Western Hill, proving Jerusalem was huge before the Babylonians destroyed it. However, because Nehemiah had so few returnees to work with, they couldn't defend that massive area. They actually had to abandon the Western Hill and only refortify the smaller original footprint.
Section 5. Life in Persian Capitals.
And here is the really massive twist in the story. The vast majority of Jews didn't pack up and go back to Jerusalem. Actually, scratch that, they completely chose to stay in the Persian Empire. The empire was massive, it was sophisticated, and incredibly well connected. They had this courier system that basically functioned like a massive ancient pony express, shooting messages across way stations from Egypt all the way to the Indus River in record time. Furthermore, the Persians were relatively lenient overlords. They allowed a degree of autonomy and economic prosperity that made staying a very attractive and comfortable choice. Consider the sheer scale of the major Persian capitals where these diaspora communities thrived. You had Persepolis, which was this awe-inspiring grand royal capital. Then there was Susa, a major secondary capital, which is actually the setting for the biblical book of Esther, a story that is entirely about Jews living deep inside the Persian government. And Pasargadae, the lush burial place of Cyrus the Great. The Jewish people largely prospered under this system, maintaining their reinvented identity while living in this massive pluralistic empire. But as we know all too well, history never stands still for very long. Which leaves us with this final, truly provocative thought. The Jewish people survived total Babylonian destruction by entirely reinventing themselves, and they found incredible prosperity under lenient Persian rule. But a new superpower is on the horizon. Hellenism, the Greek empire led by Alexander, is coming, and unlike the hands-off Persians, the Greeks bring a culturally aggressive, entirely opposite worldview that they absolutely want to export everywhere. So how will this impending cultural tsunami threaten the hard-won identity they just spent centuries fighting to rebuild? It's a massive collision of worlds, and it changes absolutely everything. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep asking those great questions.